Atlantic City used to be the resort area in the country. It deteriorated badly, costing jobs, tourist revenue, and pride. That's why I fought for regulated casino gambling, just for Atlantic City, to revitalize it, spur jobs, and restore its reputation. Yes, there will be problems, like making sure organized crime is kept out. But as a former judge and prosecutor, that's something I know how to do. And as governor, that's what I intend to do.
After the Gambinos were settled in Delran, the brothers opened up a number of pizzerias, including Father and Son's Pizza, King of Pizza, and Liberty Pizza in Philadelphia, Sal's Pizza in Delran, and P & Cone's Pizza in South Amboy, New Jersey. The brothers also owned a King of Pizza in Dover, Delaware, along with the Executive Lounge nightclub adjacent to it, and Luciana's Pizza in Landover, Maryland. Many of these were not only owned by John, his brothers, and father, or a combination, but also with other relatives. They had also established additional legitimate businesses as well, including construction and contracting firms. By 1976, Joe and Rosario had decided to pull up stakes from Delran and move a little bit south, to Cherry Hill. They built beautiful homes in the exclusive Northwood section there, near each other, and had plans to open another business in town as well. The Northwood section, by the way, was also home to many members of their immediate family, as well as members of the Angelo Bruno family. One day, in June 1976, Joe Gambino inquired about a vacant property on Haddonfield Road across from Garden State Park Racetrack in Cherry Hill. He wanted to transform the former Steak and Brew into a restaurant and nightclub called Valentino's Supper Club. Along with him that day was Augustine Guzzy Gibbons Mazio, an alleged capo in Philadelphia's Bruno crime family. It was going to cost a little less than $600,000 to get the club up and running, but it was still a lot of money. Joe couldn't do it alone, so he got a little help from his friends and family. The Gambinos' Father and Son Pizza Corporation loaned money for the purchase. John invested $50,000 of his own money and borrowed another $40,000 from a bank in Cherry Hill. Another investor was Raymond Long John Martirano, who gave Joe $10,000 through his vending machine business, John's Wholesale Distributors, courtesy of Angelo Bruno. It should be noted that Bruno was a commissioned salesman in Martirano's company. It should also be noted that Martirano was a notorious meth dealer who did his business despite the Docile Don's ban on drug dealing. On November 2, 1976, New Jersey voters approved a referendum to legalize gambling, but limited it to the boardwalk of Atlantic City. A few days later, as Valentino's was preparing to open, Gambino boss Paul Castellano and Philadelphia boss Angelo Bruno decided to check out the new club. While they might have enjoyed the plush decor and delicious food, law enforcement alleged that the real reason for their meeting was to discuss Atlantic City and whether or not the Gambino family would be able to stake a claim in Bruno's territory. Bruno gave his blessing the following Easter Sunday when Joe, John, and Rosario visited him to offer their holiday greetings. At the same time, Joe and Rosario began establishing themselves as a viable part of the Cherry Hill community, welcoming friends, neighbors, and city officials to their restaurant. Valentino's was a hit, and all was happy in Cherry Hill, at least for a time. Shortly after the opening of Valentino's, Domenico Adamita opened Casanova Ristorante in Atlantic City. Later, law enforcement alleged that the Gambino brothers had a hidden interest in the club. Law enforcement was becoming extremely suspicious of the Sicilian immigrants who were able to establish so many successful businesses in such a short amount of time. In fact, law enforcement was getting suspicious about everything, including the possibility that organized crime had already infiltrated Atlantic City. And they were particularly interested in the Gambino brothers of Cherry Hill and their associates. So in August of 1977, The New Jersey State Commission of Investigation, or SCI, held 4 days of hearings in Trenton and subpoenaed Joe, Domenico and Emanuele Adamita, the Gambino brothers' cousin Matty Gambino, and even Angelo Bruno and others to dig a little deeper. It was 4 days of brutal questioning that bordered on the ridiculous, and no matter what any of the subpoenaed witnesses testified, none of the answers were to the satisfaction of the commission. Angelo Bruno was questioned about his cigarette machines and whether or not he had one in Valentino's and Casanova's. He did. In fact, he testified that he received 3 cents for every pack of cigarettes sold. He was also questioned about meeting with Paul Castellano at Valentino's shortly before Atlantic City opened. He didn't deny the meeting. He also confirmed that the Gambino brothers had visited him on Easter after his meeting with Castellano. The investigators asked Bruno for specifics about his conversation with Castellano, but he couldn't recall many details. He told the commission he didn't know what Castellano's intentions were regarding Atlantic City, but that his intentions were to stay away from it. "That's my intentions," he told the commission. The commission also wanted to know if the Gambino brothers were at Valentino's that day and if they had engaged in conversation with he or Castellano. Bruno explained that it would be natural that Joe, who owned the restaurant, and Rosario, who helped out, would be there and visit with their customers at some point, but like his conversations with Castellano, he couldn't recall the specifics of anything talked about with the Gambino brothers. The commission wasn't happy and considered Bruno's answers evasive. But as it turned out, Bruno ended up meeting with the commission several times over the course of the next several months. But that story we'll save for a bit later. Domenico Adamita was questioned about whether or not the Gambino brothers had a hidden interest in Casanova. He denied it, the Gambinos denied it, but the commission insisted that the club had been purchased with laundered money belonging to the Gambinos. They spent hours questioning Adamita to provide mind-numbing detail about the specifics of how he came to purchase the restaurant. In their later report, the commission stated Adamita's explanations of his purchase were confusing. Apparently, Casanova was previously known as the Cabaret Disco, which also had an attached pizzeria called Paul's Pizzeria. The buildings were owned by Frank Tumolo, who had also been called to testify at the hearings. He sold the business to Domenico for $350,000, which was $50,000 over his original asking price, which he had raised because of the legalization of Atlantic City gambling, which he felt made the property more valuable. Tumolo testified that Adamita walked in off the street one day, looked at the place, and decided he wanted it. He then made a deposit, they made a deal, and the Cabaret Disco was now Casanova Ristorante. Even though there was a down payment and a mortgage on the property, the commission had a hard time believing Adamita would be able to come up with that amount of cash, and proceeded to basically badger Adamita for the answers they were seeking. They were dumbfounded as to how this 47-year-old immigrant from Palermo and boyhood friend of the Gambino brothers not only owned Casanova's, but also Pennsauken Pizza Palace in Pennsauken, New Jersey, as well as a luncheonette back in the 60s and a taxicab company back in New York. Adamita testified he purchased the Pennsauken Pizza Palace in 1975 or 1976 for $120,000, of which he put $20,000 down and took a mortgage on the rest. And he was partners in the pizzeria with Lenny Sokolic, who would offer some intriguing testimony later. Adamita also owned a home in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, which was close to Cherry Hill, which he purchased soon after buying the pizzeria. He bought the home for $53,000, and like the pizzeria, he put some cash down for a deposit, like everyone does, and took a mortgage on the rest. The funds for those purchases, he testified, came from the sale of his house in Queens and selling his taxicab business. One of the reasons the commission believed the Gambinos had a hidden interest in Casanova was because Adamita had sought advice from his friends, who themselves were successful restaurant owners, on how to run his new restaurant. They were particularly interested in Adamita's relationship with Rosario, wanting to know how many times he talked with Adamita about his business, how many times Rosario visited the business, where and when they met, what were the details of those conversations, and even how many times he saw the Gambino brothers over the course of a week, even if it was for a social visit. Adamita answered everything as best he could, but the commission wasn't satisfied with any of his answers or explanations about anything, later calling them scattered recollections, especially when it came to answers about his Casanova purchase. Adamita had testified he got the down payment money from loans from some friends, including a $50,000 loan from his pizzeria partner, Lenny Sokolic. He also received a loan from Vincenzo Corallo, a friend, and Corallo's uncle, Francesco Davi. The Davis, by the way, were close with the Inzerillo Gambino clan in Italy. At some point, Corallo ended up buying the Pensacola Pizza Palace from Sokolic and Adamita. These were all friends of Adamita's, an extended family of sorts who were helping out a friend to open a business. But the commission didn't see it that way because other than bank statements, there was no proof that this money was a loan. In other words, the commission believed there should have been some sort of promissory note, even between friends, regarding these loans. But it didn't work that way in Adamita's world, and certainly not with people he considered friends of his. He told the commission, "I'm a trusting man. I'm a businessman. 1960 I come over here. I work all day and night. I hope this country appreciates it." The questioning was relentless. Lenny Sokolic told the commission that he had borrowed some money from his family to give to Adamita to help him purchase Casanovas. These loans from relatives were part of the $50,000 he gave to Adamita. But he didn't write the loans down either, which just annoyed the commission further. Thus, in their later report, they described Sokolic as a man of mystery. But they were most intrigued by Sokolic's hole in the ground. They stated in their report that the hole in the ground that Sokolic had mentioned in testimony was a secret cache of cash, where he had hidden $40,000 in a bag and a beam in his basement. The commission couldn't understand why someone would hide money in a bag in their basement, and were even more dumbfounded when Sokolic told them that his wife or children didn't know about his secret stash. And like they had done with both Adamita and Bruno, they asked very specific details about Sokolic's hole in the ground. Where was the hole, they asked. It was hidden in the basement, Sokolic answered. Was the money in the bag, they asked. Yeah, I don't know, something like that, he said. What kind of bag was it, they asked. Was it a paper bag or a canvas bag? Like a hard cloth bag, he said. Hard cloth, like a bank bag? Well, not really, something, I don't know, I can't describe exactly the way. And what kind of currency was in there? Was it cash, first of all? Yes, it was all cash, Sokolic said. What kind of denominations of bills were they? Basically all $100 bills, and maybe they were 50s, Sokolic answered. And on the ridiculous questioning went. And like Adamita's other loans, the commission couldn't understand why Sokolic wasn't charging interest on his loan to his friend, asking him, "That's just an interest-free loan from you to him?" "Friend to friend," Sokolic said, to which one of the commission members said incredulously, "Friend to a friend." But Adamita and Sokolic weren't the commission's main targets. That gift fell to John and Rosario Gambino, who the commission described as a dominant hand in all of these transactions. Their main beef, of course, was that the Gambino brothers had a hidden interest in Casanovas, which they tried to prove by bringing in an advertising guy to testify to the facts. Robert Del Bono was the owner of Take One Advertising Agency, who had been trying unsuccessfully to get the Gambinos to open an advertising account for Valentino's. They weren't interested. But when Adamita was planning the opening of Casanovas, Del Bono had more luck and secured an ad campaign for Adamita's new restaurant. But apparently, Del Bono had shown the campaign to the Gambino brothers, which solidified the commission's belief that Joe and Rosario had a hidden interest in the restaurant, later writing in their official report, Del Bono's testimony demonstrated that when you tried to do business with the Casanova, you had to deal with the Gambinos. The commission didn't bother mentioning, however, that Adamita had sought the Gambinos' help with the opening of Casanovas, and since they had more experience in that area than he did, it would seem likely that he would seek their advice on any advertising campaigns for the restaurant as well. When it came time for Joe Gambino to testify in front of the commission, he didn't fare any better than his friend Domenico Adamita. Like the others, he was being questioned by Mike Sievage, executive director of the SCI, who took particular issue with the fact that Joe could be part owner of a meat market, specifically the G&G Meat Market in Brooklyn that he owned with his brother John. Joe was 24 years old at the time of purchase. Sievage asked, "Where did you get the money to purchase the meat market at age 24? "I don't remember," Joe said. "My brother John, I guess he got a loan from some bank or whatever. I don't know. Sievage also wanted to know more about Joe giving advice to Adamita about Casanovas and why it happened more than once. The questions had been so rapid-fire-like and often confusing that Joe's lawyer had to backtrack at one point so that Joe could clear up any confusion about the advice he gave to Adamita. Joe told the commission that Adamita liked the way he ran Valentino's and wanted to know, like Adamita had testified previously, how to run various aspects successfully. And he added that Adamita wasn't the only one that asked for business advice. "Besides Mr. Adamita, which is a guy that I know," Joe said, "I have a lot of strange people come to my restaurant Valentino and tell me they want ideas. I do that because the place is beautiful. I had the Courier Post come up to me. 'This is beautiful. You ought to put it in the paper.' I don't see anything wrong with that." Soon after the hearing, the State Division of Alcoholic Beverage Control revoked Casanova's liquor license since they really had no option to close the place down or dissolve it completely. It stayed open for a short time, but an Italian restaurant and nightclub wasn't going to last long if it couldn't offer patrons wine and spirits to enjoy with their dinner and dancing. It closed permanently shortly thereafter. Later during the hearings, Anthony Quaranta, a special agent for the SCI, took the stand to testify about the Gambinos' ties to alleged Canadian organized crime. He claimed that Emmanuel Adamita, Domenico's brother, who had also testified at the hearing, owned a cafe on 18th Street in Brooklyn and would travel frequently to Canada. The agent said that at one time, Adamita's car was stopped near the border and that Paolo Gambino, Carlo's brother, and a capo in the Gambino family, was in the car with Emmanuel, except only that it wasn't Emmanuel driving Gambino, but Paolo Gambino driving Emmanuel. This, he claimed, showed substance as to Emmanuel Adamita and ultimately the Gambino brothers standing within the organized crime structure. The commission chair asked, "Is that unusual for a capo to drive a car?" Special Agent Quaranta answered, "Well, I guess it could be as natural as President Carter driving a Secret Service agent." As a side note, he also testified that Adamita had met with the Cotroni family in Montreal, as well as the Zerilli family in Detroit on numerous occasions, and that even Tommaso Buscetta, pre-informant days, would meet frequently with the Adamitas at their cafe in Brooklyn. He even claimed that Buscetta had once lived with Domenico, but Domenico had denied it. Matty Gambino was also put under the gun. He was questioned about his quest to purchase a 325-room hotel and adjacent buildings in Atlantic City. He and a business associate of Angelo Bruno's nephew and real estate advisor, Michael Grasso, had expressed interest in buying the Shelbourne Hotel for $35 million, but they needed an additional investor. So they approached Mel Richmond, the president of a Philadelphia public relations firm, after reading about him in the newspaper. Matty testified that he had read that Richmond's company did $25 million a year worth of business and felt he was an appropriate person to approach about it because it seemed like he was a wealthy gentleman. Unfortunately, Gambino introduced himself to Richmond under a false name, calling himself Matty DiNardo, because he thought if he gave his true name, the deal would fall through. The deal fell through anyway, after the PR executive later learned Gambino's true name, just as Matty predicted. The Gambino brothers' drama wasn't just centered around the SCI hearings, it was everywhere around them. In 1978, SCI Executive Director Michael Sievage, who conducted much of the interrogation during the Atlantic City hearings the year before, told a New Jersey paper that he believed the Gambino brothers and their associates were a mob in the making. He attributed this to the fact that they were successful businessmen. Their business growth is remarkable for young guys who came from Sicily with nothing, he told the newspaper. He didn't mean it as a compliment. Siavage and Justin Dentino, chief of intelligence and special services for the New Jersey State Police, believed the Gambino brothers were basically bullying their way to the top and doing a bunch of illegal stuff in between. They and other law enforcement officials suspected the brothers were responsible for dozens of arsons at pizza parlors in and around Delran, which they claimed didn't start happening until the Gambino brothers arrived there in 1972. They even claimed that the brothers were trying to muscle in on other pizzerias the brothers didn't own in an attempt to corner the market. But none of these claims were ever substantiated. Joe had been a victim of arson himself when his King of Pizza and Executive Lounge disco in Dover, Delaware burned down in 1977. Still, law enforcement was adamant that the brothers were involved somehow, some way. There were even rumors going around at the time about a cheese war happening between Eagle Cheese, which was owned by Filippo Casamento of the Bonanno family, and Ferro Cheese, owned by Frank Ferro of the Gambino family, and who was also a cousin of the Gambino brothers. As a side note, Tommaso Buscetta's son Benedetto worked for Eagle Cheese. He was later killed. Some believed this cheese war was the true cause of the fires. One pizza parlor owner told a local newspaper, "If they don't buy the right cheese, there's a fire. If they don't buy from the right families, there's a fire." And of course, the Gambino brothers were thrown right in the thick of it. The brothers became daily newspaper fodder with unsubstantiated accusations, which fueled the local rumor mills about the suspicious Sicilian immigrants living next door. In fact, the Courier News also did a write-up on the Gambino brothers, asking their neighbors about living next door to the two Sicilians. Curiously, they mentioned the big parties they had sometimes with strange music, and how people would go into their house dressed up. But other than that, they considered them friendly, the only real complaint being that they didn't mow their lawn when they first arrived. Despite all the drama, Joe and Rosario forged ahead and tried to do something special in Cherry Hill. In 1978, they bought a piece of property which had formerly housed the old rustic tavern, which had, coincidentally, burned down. Joe and Rosario planned to open a new restaurant and name it the Don Giovanni Supper Club in honor of their big brother. They originally applied for and received a liquor license transfer, but the brothers had lied on their application regarding their arrest records, and the license was revoked. Joe had been arrested twice in Cherry Hill for serving alcoholic beverages after hours and for interfering with a police officer, and twice in New York for illegal possession of a gun and a gambling charge. But he was never convicted, so it ended up not being a factor. However, Rosario had been convicted in 1962 as an illegal alien, and in 1969 on a reduced charge of criminal trespassing after a brawl with a police officer. So, knowing the liquor license would be denied, Rosario handed over his interest in the future Don Giovanni Supper Club to Joe. The license was then reissued. Unfortunately, after overcoming that hurdle, they couldn't secure financing and the restaurant was never built. Much of it was due to the bad press the Gambino brothers had been getting, courtesy of law enforcement. They eventually sold the liquor license and property to the Victoria Station restaurant chain. Around the same time, John had a date with an international banker. With all the money being made in the pizza business, it seems logical that someone would be needed to watch the cash. In the case of the Gambinos, that someone was Michele Sindona. Sindona was a powerhouse Sicilian-born banker who handled the cash for many clients throughout the world, including the Vatican and even the financial transactions of the CIA. But his most important clients were the Gambino brothers and their mafia friends in Italy. Sicilian mafia informant Francesco Marino Manoia, who will show up later in the story, told authorities that Sindona laundered heroin trafficking proceeds for the Bentate, Spatola, Inzerillo, and Gambino network and started working with the Gambinos in 1957. Sindona not only handled the Gambinos' money, he was also a close friend of John's and was a financial advisor for John's G&G concrete business. The two were seen together frequently throughout New York City in the late 1960s and early 1970s, dining at high-end restaurants or hobnobbing with the rich and famous at dinner parties. They were also seen together numerous times at the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue in New York City, and even at Valentino's in Cherry Hill. But things started to go downhill for Sindona in the mid-1970s when the big money he was managing started disappearing and the banks he owned started going broke. The Gambinos were justifiably concerned. He was their money man, and they wanted their money. Sindona was in a tight spot. He was under indictment in New York for defrauding Franklin National Bank of $45 million and wasn't permitted to leave the city. Sindona was set to go to trial in October 1979, and he needed to make things right. So he turned to the only lifeline he had left, his good friend, John Gambino. Gambino and Sindona hatched a plan for a staged kidnapping to get Sindona back to Italy so he could gather documentation about all the people he did business with and all their sordid secret details as a way to reduce the charges pending against him in New York. He had also intended to blackmail all his political enemies, including then Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti, to save his ass as a way to get back the Gambinos' money. Sindona had been a member of the P2, or Propaganda Due, a super-secret, high-level Freemason organization that was involved in all sorts of intriguing scandals, including coup attempts in Italy. Sometime in June 1979, Michele Sindona met with John Gambino and Rosario Spatola at the Conco d'Oro Motel in Staten Island, where Sindona talked about his plans for a coup to free Sicily from the mainland. He told them he needed their help, that he had the support of Licio Gelli, the master of the P2 Lodge, and if they helped, he would give the Gambinos control of the orange export business. Whether they agreed is unknown. But a couple of months later, John reportedly procured a fake passport for Sindona in the name of Joseph Bonamico, and on August 2, 1979, Sindona was kidnapped by Sicilian terrorists. Even Giacomo Vitali, the brother-in-law of Sicilian boss Stefano Bontate, was involved in the plot. Sindona was gone for 11 weeks. Of course, the FBI didn't believe it. While he was missing, Sindona lived in a villa in Torretta, Italy, owned by Spatola, and was escorted around Palermo by John, who had gone there soon after Sindona arrived to keep an eye on him. All the while, Sindona was trying to put together what he needed to get himself out of his hole. Unfortunately, the blackmailing plot fell through when Rosario's brother Vincenzo was arrested trying to deliver a letter to Sindona's lawyer about a ransom meeting to be held in Vienna. Sindona secretly returned to the U.S. and was supposedly picked up at the airport by Rosario Gambino, who then hid the kidnapped victim for 3 days. On October 16, Joseph Maselli, a P2 Masonic doctor, shot Sindona in the leg to lend authenticity to the kidnapping scheme. He was then dropped off at a telephone booth where he called his lawyer, telling him he had escaped his kidnappers. Later, when John was being interrogated for passport irregularities at a U.S. airport before a flight to Italy, police found a piece of paper on him with the words 741 Frankfurt, Saturday, written in Italian. Why John would have had that piece of paper on his person is anyone's guess, but it doesn't make sense. Either way, the feds determined it was a key piece of information in Sindona's alleged kidnapping and learned the once powerful banker had, indeed, returned to New York on TWA Flight 741 from Frankfurt on a Saturday. John and the others involved were arrested and charged with aggravated extortion in Italy. Sindona was convicted for bank fraud and sentenced to 25 years in jail in the U.S. After being released, Sindona was extradited to Italy. In 1986, he died while serving time on a murder conviction. His coffee had been poisoned with cyanide. After the Sindona nightmare and the probable loss of millions of dollars, John's headaches were just beginning. Back in Cherry Hill, his brothers were starting to feel the heat. This is the end of Part 2 of the Cherry Hill Gambino series. Part 3 is coming soon. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of Mob Fireside Chat presented by the Button Guys of the New York Mafia. And don't forget to comment and let us know your thoughts about Part 2 of the Cherry Hill Gambinos or any of our other mob tales. You can also visit thenewyorkmafia.com and indulge yourself in many more tales of the underworld. Thanks for watching. Until next time.